How the man of steel became the world's richest. The Industrial Revolution is often spoken of as the age where machine came to life, the age where work became easier, and the age where mega-rich businessmen made their millions. But the side of the story rarely ever told is how the coming of machines put manual businesses out of work and sent households into nothing but hopelessness. One man's story tells the tale of the two sides of the Industrial Revolution. This man is Andrew Carnegie, the man who rose from the depths of extreme poverty to become one of the richest men to ever live. Born in rural Dunfermline in Scotland on November 25, 1835, Carnegie's life began with relative promise and hope. His father, William, was a handloom weaver whose business was able to cater for a small family of 4, including Carnegie's mom and brother Thomas. And due to hard work and good fortune, demand for the family business would gradually increase. So Carnegie's father would then move the family from their one-room apartment to a much larger house that befitted their status. The future looked bright for a young Carnegie who attended the free school in Dunfermline with the hope of taking over his father's business someday. But when the Industrial Revolution and its accompanying changes arrived, things would suddenly never be the same for Andrew Carnegie and his family. As it happened, new steam-powered looms became more and more popular, and hand weavers found it difficult to keep their business profitable. It eventually meant that Carnegie's father would go out of business, and the family fell on extremely hard times. So to help with their increasing declining financial situation, Carnegie's mom, Margaret, had to essentially take up the role of breadwinner. She did so by selling potted meats at her shop with her brother. Unfortunately, however, their situation did not really improve, but they would come up with a plan that would change the course of their lives forever. This plan came to Carnegie's mom, who upon hearing that her siblings who took this step lived comfortable lives, decided to set the idea to her husband. It was a chance at new beginnings, a chance to rebuild, and a chance to pursue the American dream. Carnegie's father immediately agreed to it. Why would he not? They were desperate. So in what was still seen as a bold step at the time, due to risks involved in travel, Carnegie's father would sell most of the family's belongings and also borrow money from a friend to make the move to America with the whole family in 1848. The family arrived in the Pennsylvania town of Allegheny in September of 1848. And the young Carnegie, who was 12 at the time, had to play his part in the family's effort to rebuild. Despite his age, he would work at a cotton mill in Pittsburgh for 12 hours a day and 6 days a week, only earning a wage of $1.20 per week. Can you imagine that? Well, things were equally tough for his father too, because the senior Carnegie would try to revive his handloom weaving business, only for him to quit due to difficulties and work at the cotton mill with his son. But he was not satisfied with what he was earning there either. So depressed and frustrated, he again decided to try and revive his business. Sadly, the frustrations never went away, and Carnegie's father would die in the midst of the hardships, leaving just a mother and 2 sons to navigate the troubles of a faraway land. It was clear there and then that life in America did not quite start as smoothly as they had hoped, and the young Carnegie would vow to himself to be successful enough to lift his family out of poverty, no matter what it took. Thankfully, things started to look up for Carnegie. He would then receive a pay rise at work, going from earning as little as $1.20 per week to $2 per week. Now, before you ask questions, note that $2 in that time is equivalent to about $65 in 2024, and $1.20 as it was would be $39 today. A healthy pay rise then, you would say. Well, truth is, it still was not anywhere near enough to cater for Carnegie, let alone the family he was now responsible for. And it would not be enough today either. But through hard work, dedication and resourcefulness, Carnegie showed he was surely on the right path. The hard work did pay off, because in 1849, Carnegie would land a job in Ohio Telegraph Company in Pittsburgh. Any guesses for his salary? It was $2.50 per week, or $62 in today's currency, and this represented another pay rise for a promising and resourceful young man. Carnegie's resourcefulness also meant that he caught the eye of many important people in his line of work. He was indeed learning rapidly on the job, in order to grow as a person and continue to be productive at work. So unsurprisingly, Carnegie would receive a promotion within a year. But Carnegie's love for learning did not end only in his work. He was an ardent lover of books, which is why when a certain private library owner, known as Colonel James Adamson, opened his library up to the public, Carnegie would not waste the opportunity to borrow and read some books. This would then inspire him later in life to become a famous giver of books himself. Carnegie's steady rise continued, and at this point, he was convinced that perhaps his father's bold step to migrate from Scotland to America, despite the dangers involved, was beginning to bear fruit. The American dream suddenly did not look like a dream anymore for Carnegie. Eventually, at 18, the dream edged even closer. He would be employed as a secretary and telegraph operator to a certain Thomas A. Scott, a businessman of the famous Pennsylvania Railroad. It was another bold step for Carnegie because the railroad industry was quite new and different from the telegraph company he had been working with. But like he became known for, it did not take him long before he knew the ins and outs of the job. In fact, not long after his employment, Thomas A. Scott had taken a liking to him and would later offer Carnegie a promotion within 6 years of their time working together. So Carnegie became superintendent of the Pennsylvania Roads Western Division in 1859 at just 24 years old. He would then hire his brother Tom as personal secretary and telegraph operator, the same role he held for Thomas Scott. Carnegie also broke gender barriers by bringing his cousin, Maria Hogan, on board. She was the first ever female telegraph operator in America, and so with railroad business thriving and America becoming a global leader in the industry, Carnegie became richer, earning a salary of $1,500 a year, a whopping $60,000 in 2024. Now that's what you call a pay rise. Carnegie's determination had finally taken his family out of poverty, and what lied ahead of him was nothing but power, influence, and wealth. The American Civil War of 1861 had varying impact on the economy of America. Businesses suffered and entire industries came crashing down. But in the midst of the misfortune, opportunities were still abundant if one looked hard enough. And Carnegie was not one to miss an opportunity. As it was, the war effort required that ammunition and military personnel were transported across the country to support the Union forces. And Carnegie's former boss Thomas Scott had been appointed Assistant Secretary of War in charge of military operations. Scott was more than a mentor to Carnegie and eventually brought him on to help him in his new role. Carnegie would help reopen important Washington rail lines that were cut and ensure the telegraph service was in good enough shape to help the Union forces. His work ultimately helped in the total defeat of the Confederacy and victory for the Union forces of America, representing a landmark moment for a country he had come to call home. But what the war effort eventually showed was that the iron industry was the next big American industry. So Carnegie, as you would expect, immediately quit his work in rail to pursue the new adventures of iron. Again, it was a brave move, but Carnegie was determined to make it work. Why would he not? After all, iron would be the foundation of his eventual and continuous success as an industrialist, and he knew that more than anyone else. Subsequently, Carnegie would establish his own iron business in Pittsburgh, and in 1865, Keystone Bridge Company was born. The business model was simple, yet highly effective. Carnegie would look to produce iron rails to replace the existing wooden bridges with modern iron bridges across the country. He would also make use of key relationships he had developed over the years to win contracts in rail production for his company, ahead of potential competitors. Two of these key contacts were from his old work in rail. They were none other than his former mentor, Thomas A. Scott and J. Edgar Thompson, who was on the board of Pennsylvania Railroad Company. In 3 years, Carnegie's annual income rose to about $50,000, slowly establishing him as one of the most successful young industrialists in the country. Don't bother trying to convert that amount into today's currency, by the way. It's an awful lot. But Carnegie was clearly driven to achieve even more, so Keystone Bridge Company would spread its wings into the steel industry. The company's first landmark steel contract came in the Edge Bridge project, and Keystone provided most of the steel throughout the construction of the road and railway bridge, stretching along the famous Mississippi River. The Edge Bridge is the oldest bridge on the river, having existed for over a century. It was completed in 1874 and connects St. Louis, Missouri and East St. Louis in Illinois, remaining one of America's greatest landmarks to this day. More success in steel would come for Carnegie, but with millions to his name at an age where most would normally start life, Carnegie would now begin to reflect on his life and wonder what's the point of his riches if he did not give back to society. But in the meantime, he was still driven to achieve more. And so through innovation and technology, Carnegie adopted and transformed an idea that would ultimately make steel cheaper during its production process. This was known as the Bessemer process. It essentially involved burning away the carbon content of pig iron. With the sharp drop in steel prices, demand for it would also increase, making Carnegie even more richer in the process. Additionally, Carnegie essentially bought rival companies within the steel production value chain, thereby expanding his business production capacity. It eventually meant that Carnegie would play a big part in ensuring that the US overtook the UK as the top steel producers in the world by 1889. Such was the influence of Carnegie Steel in its prime. Andrew Carnegie was now a businessman in the complete sense of the word, with expertise not only in winning contracts and closing deals, but also in strategically positioning his company in the eyes of key stakeholders to achieve continued success. He lobbied government officials for favorable taxes and even named one of his companies after his former superior, J. Edgar Thomson, all in a bid to capture the necessary goodwill to make his business as successful as possible. It did work, of course it did, because J. Edgar Thomson's steel works became one of the most important pieces of Carnegie's steel story. Then in 1892, Carnegie brought all his steel and iron subsidiaries under one umbrella in order to command better oversight and control over them. Carnegie Steel Company was born. Consequently, Carnegie's leadership and success as a steel magnate and industrialist would catch the eye of certain famous banker and financier by the turn of the century. His name is J.P. Morgan. Yep, you guessed right, that's J.P. Morgan. It was 1901, and at the age of 65, Carnegie would consider retiring from the day-to-day bustle of business, and he saw the pending partnership between him and J.P. Morgan as a perfect excuse to lay down his tools. This is how it happened. J.P. Morgan was on a mission to unite all the major steel corporations in the country, and to achieve this, he offered to buy Carnegie Steel Company, which was undoubtedly the country's most successful steel company at the time. The deal went through, and Carnegie would pocket about $225 million, representing over $8 billion as of 2023. This historic deal led to J.P. Morgan establishing a billion-dollar steel corporation known as US Steel, while Carnegie, on the other hand, instantly became a very rich man, arguably the richest man in the world at the time. Carnegie finally retired and could now look forward to giving back to society at last, just as he had long dreamed about. Truthfully, it is not very often that billionaires dedicate a large chunk of their wealth to making a difference in society. This has always been a criticism of the rich and famous, but Carnegie for one did not stand for that. At an early age, he already understood the hardship of life and the indignity of poverty, so as the years rode by on his life, he would come to appreciate what a little help could do to the life of anyone that needed it. Through writing, he spoke against his disinterest in continuously acquiring wealth and expressed the need for the rich to offer a helping hand. But he did not only write it, he acted it. Because around 1901, he would donate an amount of $25,000 to the spelling reform movement. This was heavily inspired by his love for reading and writing at a young age, and he would continue to focus on everything books in his philanthropic contributions. No man has arguably contributed more to libraries in the world than Andrew Carnegie. This is a fact, but his love for books was unmatched and translated greatly into his philanthropy. Taking inspiration from other philanthropers such as Enoch Pratt, Carnegie established 3,000 public libraries in the United States, Canada, and Britain, alongside many other English-speaking countries in the world. Do not be surprised if you come across a Carnegie-built library in your community. There are a lot of them around. The first library he established came in his own town, Dunfermline, in 1883, while he was still deep in his work as a steel magnate. But to ensure the smooth establishment of more of these libraries, he handed over their supervision to his personal secretary, James Bertram. It would also lead to the establishment of Carnegie Corporation of New York, a fund that would continue to give even after Carnegie's death. Carnegie, with the help of Bertram, also donated funds to establish a library in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, where Carnegie's family had first settled on their immigration to America all those years ago. Poetic, isn't it? Well, with an amount of $250,000, the Allegheny Library could also include a state-of-art music hall. He also donated $500,000 for a library in Pittsburgh, the Pennsylvania city, where he became a successful businessman. However, his philanthropic effort would stretch beyond libraries into universities in general. By 1902, Carnegie would help in the establishment of the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh and the Carnegie Institute of Washington, D.C., but there were perhaps two main educational donations he's known for. First, it was his $10 million donation towards the establishment of the Carnegie Trust for the University of Scotland. The sum was huge money for university donation at the time, and it greatly helped to not only improve scientific research, but also helped brilliant but needy students get into universities in his hometown, Scotland. The second notable donation came when he donated to the Tuskegee Institute for Black American Education. This went a long way to aid a mostly underprivileged black student population in the then America get the needed help they deserve to bridge the racial gap that existed. While he helped the needy across America, Carnegie also preached a fair wage system together with favorable working conditions for his workers. Although his workers did not enjoy the rights and benefits he preached for them, worker dissatisfaction would eventually lead to a deadly strike that claimed the lives of 7 Carnegie Steel Company workers and resulted in the near assassination of Henry Frick, a chief operator at Carnegie's Homestead Steel Works. It is said that Carnegie himself would have been a victim of the assassination attempt had he not left for Scotland before the protests reached their peak. Lucky Carnegie. Well, in the end, he would establish a large pension fund for the workers of Homestead Steel Works, but critics would never forgive him for the deaths. Carnegie, on the other hand, would make peace with it before he died. Andrew Carnegie died in 1919 at the age of 83. To many, he is the embodiment of the American dream, a real proof that an immigrant can work hard and break the barrier of poverty and become as successful as possible. His impact on the American growth in the years of Industrial Revolution cannot be denied. His imprint on the steel industry will live forever, but there is no doubt that Carnegie's preference would be to be mainly remembered as the man who willingly gave and encouraged others like him to give. This is a man who ended up giving about 90% of his entire wealth by the time of his death, and through his Carnegie United Kingdom Trust, this legacy of giving lives on today.